busca integrar su formación académica con su pasión por el movimiento consciente, utilizando la ciencia y la experiencia personal, tanto de sus clientes, participantes y demás población como de sí misma, para promover que ser activo puede cambiar vidas, tanto a través de la actividad física como en general a través del movimiento consciente. Las personas pueden evitar enfermedades crónicas, sentirse mejor en su cuerpo y mantener o encontrar una mejor calidad de vida. Damos la bienvenida entonces a la doctora Harden y escuchamos a continuación su presentación.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so excited to be here. Although virtually, I'm excited to share this research and potentially continue partnership between Virginia Tech and the Universidad de Costa Rica. Gracias por invitarme. I am learning Spanish as we speak. I've got 8 lessons behind me, so thank you for letting me present in English. And today's presentation is the first time I'm presenting work that's taken me about 10 years to start to compile. And when I was in Costa Rica back in May, I heard Dr. Francisco Siles say, sometimes you have to pursue your dreams and then the money will come. And I'm really excited to talk a bit about the art, the science, and the application of yoga principles for health, and how it relates to the communities we serve, as well as ourselves as the scientists behind the science. So I will talk a bit about yoga principles and how that they can create health among academics, so the scientists behind the science and the communities we serve, whether that's adolescents in school or someone with a chronic condition, these end users of our information that we're developing across the translational spectrum. So thank you so much for the introduction. It went through a lot of the kind of higher level background and research, but I wanted to speak a little bit more about my specific roles in academia and the hats that I wear through my job at Virginia Tech. So I am the director of the Physical Activity Research and Community Implementation Laboratory. And as you heard from the bio, that's really looking at physical activity promotion. And we do that across the lifespan, as you see pictured here, from conception and prenatal health all the way to older adult health in the lab. And we do this through behavioral psychology and dissemination and implementation science. And what that means is I'm really interested in the reasons and how and why someone chooses to be physically active, as well as the systems that support their ability to be physically active. So thinking about policy, systems, and environmental influences on physical activity behaviors and choice. As was mentioned, I'm also a yoga instructor, and this passion really helps me think about how we might integrate yoga principles in academia. Giving one example, right before doing a presentation, grounding ourselves, doing some deep breath work to say, why am I actually here to present? I'm here to connect, to hopefully build upon other people's research and share what's working in mine and what's not, so that other people don't make the same mistakes that I did. And I think that that's really the rich beauty of academia and the scientific process, is setting the stage or the foundation for someone else to build upon that. And the reason that I am connected with Costa Rica is because I teach a study abroad course. The first iteration was this January, but we will hope to deliver it annually and see how that might develop into a research, teaching, and outreach partnership with the university. And pictured here is just a still shot of instructing how to do a tree pose for people who are pregnant. One of my most recent and favorite studies that I read, it's not a recent study, but it's one that I found recently, provides some empirical data for the fact that how we show up in the lab, the classroom, on review panels, even in virtual spaces really matters, because there's this relational energy where you could truly catch someone's vibe. So if you show up in your research setting, in your teaching setting, or in any other hats that we as academics wear with harried energy and this frenetic energy, that things aren't going well, that we're stressed, that we're overly busy, that shows up. And if we were able to use practices to calm our own nervous system, that might help us be better leaders in the classroom, the laboratory, etc. And I experienced that firsthand in Costa Rica, often, on how we're here to connect. We can slow down and we can still be really productive when we have that energy, when we're grounded and we know that we're valuing the shared humanity in all of us, and how that might help us actually advance our science faster, and more rigorously as well. So I want to back up and talk a bit about one of the pilot studies I'd like to present that's kind of laying that foundation that I mentioned for the work that we're going to do in the future in my lab. This was recently published in Translational Behavioral Medicine, and it's a mixed method study looking at a tailored coaching program for health researchers to manage our own stress and achieve our own work-life balance. I'll walk through a couple of the specifics of the program in the next slide, but I wanted to start with the high level that we as researchers, particularly in health promotion, often experience stress or burnout or other negative occupational phenomenon because there's so much energetic work in doing participatory work and working with people who potentially have a chronic condition, or working in communities that are underserved, maybe not having access to healthcare, et cetera. And so really valuing how do we create access and affordability to evidence-based programs, policy, and practice. So this emotional drain that scientists might experience can also be combated with the same behavior change principles that we ourselves promote for other people to increase their physical activity behaviors. So that was kind of the impetus to this study. And what we designed was a 9-week coaching program called Fuel. It was focus, unplug, exercise, and love were the 4 key components. So examples of focus are to engage in email blackout periods so that you can engage in deep work. Unplugging might be engaging in 3-part diaphragmatic breathing. Exercise is helping us promote our ability to be physically active throughout the work week. And love is this example of reframing the way we self-talk. For example, oh, we're late for this presentation, or we're behind schedule, or whatever this self-talk is. How can we reframe it so that we can talk to ourselves the way we want to talk to others, and then teach people how to treat us? And there were 2 other components that developed organically for the intervention, which included the fact that the scientists were asking for help on writing, as well as implementation science. And the reason I share this is because this program was developed through theoretical models in order to match meaning and purpose and productivity and increasing self-efficacy. And while those were the things we focused on, other things organically developed as ways that we want to look at holistic health for the scientists behind the science. It was a pretty intensive intervention. So the Compendium for Health Coaching suggests that many health coaching interventions, say for people with diabetes or heart disease, they last about 9 hours per program. And so that's where we developed ours to match the average duration of these health coaching programs. And it did take about 9 hours of direct education with our participants, but it also took additional time for planning sessions, for follow-up, for providing toolkits and information sheets. And so this ended up costing, in the bottom right corner, a total of 207 hours for the coach. So when we're thinking about holistic health and the multiple tiers of health, we have the scientists who are feeling unhealthy as they're trying to help other people experience health. Then we also have the coach who's experiencing burnout from delivering a health coaching program for those who deliver health interventions. So we want to start thinking about how we can provide these materials, practices, and policy in a way that fits within people's general workflow. So this is really a snapshot of what the program consisted of, how long it took to deliver, and then at the bottom, we see our participant attendance. So many people had to reschedule the sessions, and it took an average of 10 weeks to complete the 9-week program. So we let people take the class or the one-on-one sessions after the 9 weeks if they needed to. And so these are really related to our implementation outcomes to deliver the program. So if you're thinking about scaling the intervention, is this feasible within what a health coach might be expected to deliver? But the data were really compelling. We had quantitative and qualitative data, and what I have presented on the screen here is related to our qualitative code book. I'll highlight a few as I walk through the table where there were certain themes and sub-themes, our categories, and then a couple of exemplar quotes from individuals that participated in the program. So flourishing really emerged as a holistic well-being. When we hear that many people are experiencing burnout or engaging in quiet quitting because things are really intense as we're trying to wear all the different hats of being a health researcher, one way to promote human flourishing is to focus, unplug, exercise, and love. And so through those strategies, our participants were really able to start flourishing. And one of the quotes is, "As a result of fuel, I move through most days with a sense of calm, humor, and flexibility that I was lacking when I started this program. It is wonderful. I feel truly happy." And so while the intervention was only 9 sessions and on average across 10 weeks, we were able to have profound, significant impacts on the individual as reported by themselves in our qualitative data, as well as through a proxy measure. So each participant was able to assign either a loved one or a coworker to be a proxy measure to say, what did we observe about the way this person changed? And this one example quote is highlighted because if we could have more people engaging in calmness, humor, and flexibility as we try to develop our interventions and get those out into practice, we might be able to create a healthier culture within academia itself. So this started us thinking about these intra and interpersonal influences in academia. So we have dis-ease, and it's specifically hyphenated to say it's a lack of ease. And this lack of ease, this lack of calmness and flexibility sometimes leads to overstimulated nervous systems, and then how that shows up when we're in our labs and doing our research, teaching, and outreach efforts. And pictured here is just an example of something that might stress some people out. So I was in the middle of a Zoom presentation, and of course I had my coffee next to me. I had plenty of space because I want to be fully prepared. And then midway through the presentation, my coffee spilled all over my computer. And prior to being able to engage in the focus, unplug, exercise, and love principles, this would have thrown me for a loop because it would have been really hard to come back to being the scientist because I let people know that I was human because I had a coffee, it spilled, I need a minute because literally my keyboard is messed up, so I can't continue the presentation. So what do I do next? So I share that picture and that example because perhaps some folks in the audience have also had something incredibly stressful like this happen to you during a presentation. So while our personal impacts of dis-ease are one area of focus, of course, this isn't a panacea for all of the issues within academia. There are other structural issues and administrative issues that lead to dis-ease or stress or chronic fatigue. But these are the things that we could potentially apply yoga principles to help. So some of the most prominent issues in academia include things like funding, trying to find funds to support your passion projects, your research initiatives, the whole purpose of your entire career. So your target audience or your topic or your issue that drives you, and needing to find funding to support that. We also have some issues with funding for the amount of workload we do. In many academic structures, professors are taking on administrative roles. They have all of their teaching roles and all of their research roles. And so when we're stretched so thin, is there enough time, energy, and things like that to achieve our funding? We also experience ongoing discrimination in terms of identity, sexism, and racism within the system. And then things like losing oneself in the drive to succeed. So this is some of the psychological underpinnings of this dis-ease and stress, is that a lot of people aim to achieve and be productive, and sometimes we lose sight of who we are behind the work that we're doing. And so all of these types of primary or prominent issues can be mapped to our primary energy centers, called chakras in yoga, in the Indo-Aryan language of Sanskrit. And if we map these primary energy centers to traditional Chinese medicine, to yoga, to all of these different practices, including neuroscience and psychology, we're trying to get at this very similar constructs of safety and stability, of connection and creativity, of self-worth, of honesty, and of flourishing. So my lab is starting to move into a focus on flourishing, which is personal and professional holistic well-being. And each of the components of flourishing can also be mapped to these primary energy centers. So when we went to the literature to say, how might we balance these primary energy centers or chakras, the literature was nascent or non-existent, to be honest. Some of the things that we searched for didn't have any empirical evidence. So there's a lot of rich historical evidence and experiential evidence, but not perhaps as much empirical evidence. And I'll give one more example that's articulated here on the left side of the screen. So someone who has to do public speaking, such as an instructor or a professor, maybe they have anxiety before presenting. And one yoga strategy to reduce anxiety is to engage in a forward fold, bringing your chest and your torso towards your thighs. This might engage in calming of our nervous system. However, for some people, folding forward actually makes them feel more anxious. So this leads to some empirical investigation on for whom, under what conditions, and how might this practice improve a sense of ease, calm, and flexibility that our previous participant mentioned. So if the forward fold doesn't work for someone, another strategy might be engaging in pranayama or breath work. One breath work or pranayama practice that might help reduce anxiety before presenting is the 4-7-8 breath. Inhaling for the count of 4, holding for a count of 7, and exhaling for a count of 8. So without the harried energetics in our body, we can perhaps ground, get focused and centered, and be able to confidently deliver the presentation. So some of these preliminary strategies and suggestions are out there, but the empirical evidence as to when they work and for whom they work has not been tested in randomized controlled trials to date. So what we're proposing is yoga interventions across a society, behavior, biology nexus. And this nexus, the principles of this nexus were introduced in the National Institutes of Health, and we adapted it for yoga. So in the society, behavior, biology nexus, we acknowledge that there are micro-level influences of behavior, such as your groups, your family, and your social network. So sorry, I'm starting at the top here and I'll try to highlight. So we have our micro level with our what I just mentioned. Then we move up into the meso level where we have our work sites, our schools, our communities, our healthcare system that people are then moving into. And then at the macro level, we have influences such as national, state, and large area dynamics and politics. Then we have our global level. So how does our behavior impact our decisions, impact our economy, and impact the environment? So it's really saying anything that's happening at the individual level ultimately has a ripple across all of these different levels. We do have some evidence around, and so then in the middle, you'll see the translational spectrum that's talking about what we know about physical activity, what we know about yoga, what we know about some of these practices as we investigate more of the biology or the mechanisms of why a 4-7-8 breath practice might work, or why a forward fold might work to calm us. Then we have to think about the behavior or the applied side. So you might be thinking, okay, I'll try the 4-7-8 breath work, but then whether or not you do it is the intention behavior gap. So we have some opportunities to look at what are the constraints for when someone chooses to use this practice or not? How do they even learn about it in the first place? How do they build self-confidence through that? And then the final thing I'll highlight within this figure is that these are the 7 primary chakras that were previously mentioned. And if we can move through balancing each of the chakras, we might be able to conduct research, teaching, and outreach differently. So at the root, we have our financial stability and our intellectual security. So perhaps people might be concerned for things like author order or intellectual property, or how do we create stability for our intellectual contributions and ensure that the funding matches our contributions. Things within the sacral chakra include sexual safety, creative expression, and the birth of ideas. These feel a little bit esoteric at times, but again, they can be matched from the micro level and up, because what type of culture of health are we promoting in academia so that people feel safe as they are pursuing their research initiatives? The solar plexus is this balance of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So what are practices I need to ensure that I get the grant over the finish line? So I want that healthy stress of prioritizing my work, but I don't want the unhealthy stress of not, we don't want everything to be perfect all the time, because then we might not have that get up and go. Then also moving towards our heart, for our compassion for ourselves and our self-compassion. In health behavior research, we're trying to integrate that for other people to do in terms of their physical activity behaviors. How might we do that for ourselves as academics? And then I'll leave the final 3 with just this idea that we speak our truth, we listen to our intuition, and then we can ultimately flourish by surrendering to the things that we cannot control. So you can put forth an incredible grant and still not get funded. What are the strategic ways that you can continue to do the work that you love, that fuels you, even if your root chakra isn't necessarily flourishing in and of itself? And I want to pause here because I have been mentioning yoga, and yoga is such a ancient, historical, and cultural practice, and it's global, and it's also extremely personal. But when we look at it from the public health perspective, one paper that I really like talks about the yoga kernels for public health. And if we think about this grand concept of yoga, 3 of the things that we can focus on for public health are movement, breath work, and mindfulness. Things that the Center for Human Movement might be interested in promoting for this balance and flourishing. And I have highlighted here on the right that yoga kernels are these really discrete, evidence-based practices that are amenable to scientific study and can be effectively disseminated. So sometimes when we think about all of the things that yoga can be, some of those things are not able to be empirically studied. It might just be experience. It might be very personal, but some of the things we might be able to study, such as testing whether or not the 4-7-8 breath work helps individuals. So to walk us through one example across the translational spectrum, this is an example of a research question that might be asked as we consider the society behavioral nexus of yoga. And pictured here is this bidirectionality across the translational spectrum. I'll start with the T0 on the left side. So we know that thyroid activation releases calcitonin. We also know from more basic research that calcitonin improves bone density. We know also that yoga designed for people with osteoporosis improves bone density. But we have not yet done studies that look, controlled studies that look at the minimum dose of Jalandhara Bandha necessary to improve bone density. If you're wondering what Jalandhara Bandha is, it's the picture in T4 bringing the chin towards the chest to activate the thyroid. So can Jalandhara Bandha, bringing the chin towards the chest or towards the throat, activate calcitonin release, thereby increasing bone density, thereby preventing or managing things such as osteoporosis, arthritis, fall prevention? And then once we know this through randomized controlled trials, if this one movement or one asana or one posture might have basic implications, how do we then translate that so that yoga instructors are saying things that are evidence-based? So many yoga instructors are being trained in ways one of the biggest things that we do is we parrot what we heard someone else say. And as we know, as researchers, sometimes the evidence or the science or the things that may be true at the time based on the scientific evidence are not necessarily translated. And sometimes yoga instructors say things that are actually false as we look at the biology, behavior, society nexus. So in order to have this bidirectionality, we need to continuously run these randomized controlled trials and then disseminate these findings to multiple entities. So we need to ensure that the yoga practitioners are aware of these evidence-based practices, as well as the yoga teachers who are promoting them in the classroom. So this is an example of the type of research that we are starting to do in my lab to really speak across the translational spectrum and not just think about the applied side, but what does the application of something like Jalandhara Bandha do in terms of calcitonin release or bone density? But that's just one example of many, and I hope that helps walk it through this translational spectrum and the bidirectionality that we propose. So to kind of bring it all together, I do conduct this class in Costa Rica. This is a picture of us having a lecture on one of the beaches in Nosara. And as many of you perhaps know, the culture in Costa Rica and specifically in the Nicoya Peninsula have been previously studied by folks like Dan Buettner, and really finding that there are these focuses on things like having a sense of purpose, believing in a power greater than yourself, consuming fruits and vegetables, and then something that's incredibly important to all present today, moving every day. It doesn't have to be yoga. It can be walking, it can be biking, it can be any form of physical movement, gardening, and just trying to get people back to seeing physical activity as a gift rather than a chore that they have to do. And when I think about all of the different building blocks and paved path to my current areas of research interest, I think, how might we create an academic blue zone? How do we ensure that the scientists who are working to promote health, either in schools, healthcare systems, in the community, et cetera, how are they being supported to move every day? to have a sense of purpose and to believe in a power greater than themselves. And this is what the focus of the next 10 years of my research will be. And it overlays well. And how can we build a culture of health for ourselves so that we can conduct our research, teaching, and outreach differently? And some of the ways that I will be exploring this is through a podcast, a book, webinars for academics, and then, of course, as articulated on the right side of the screen, applying a very ancient and old way of conducting research, teaching, and outreach. So bringing in yoga principles so that we can flourish, and that these things are scalable and sustainable, and I think ultimately free, because conducting a 4-7-8 breath count with myself doesn't require any app. It doesn't require any facilitator. It doesn't require anything except the initial knowledge and practice. So how do we disseminate that out? And I hope ultimately to be able to create higher vibrations in higher education through this really intentional use of behavior change principles, dissemination and implementation science, and of course, yoga to promote flourishing for the scientists behind the science. I'd like to highlight that we have a number of free downloadable resources on the website at parcilab.org, PARCI lab.org/resources. So if you're interested in learning anything about how we communicate some of these yoga principles for flourishing, this might be a great website to visit. And please do keep in touch beyond this amazing 10-year celebration here today. And I'd like to thank you so much for your time and attention. And I hope that perhaps this has sparked some interest in you for the practices that might help you find grounding and a sense of purpose as you conduct your research, teaching, and outreach. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harden, for such a thorough presentation. There won't be Q&A because of the time, but we are very grateful for your participation in our anniversary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Continuando con el programa de presentaciones, tenemos a la doctora Margareth Lorena Alfonso Mora. Ella nos compartirá su conferencia titulada El uso de sí en el ámbito terapéutico, Experiencia desde Fisioterapia. La doctora Alfonso es directora del Grupo de Investigación Movimiento Corporal Humano del Programa de Fisioterapia de la Universidad de La Sabana en Colombia. Es fisioterapeuta con estudios de maestría en rehabilitación deportiva y su doctorado fue en Ciencias de la Educación y del Deporte. Sus áreas de investigación han sido la actividad física, la salud del adulto mayor y más recientemente el dolor lumbar. Su producción bibliográfica está emergiendo, consiguiendo hasta ahora 25 publicaciones académicas. Continuamos entonces con la presentación de la doctora Alfonso.
Buenos días a todos, ¿me escuchan bien? Voy a proceder a compartir mi pantalla. No sé usar. Ahora sí, creo que estamos. Buenos días a todos, muchas gracias por la invitación. A Francisco, espero que estén muy bien en estos 10 años de celebración del grupo de investigación. Yo estoy en Bogotá, Colombia. Estoy con mis estudiantes de fisioterapia en este momento, quienes están escuchando la charla y estuvieron escuchando anteriormente la charla de la doctora Samantha. Pues les vengo a compartir hoy algo relacionado con el uso de sí, que en palabras de la doctora Samantha nos lo explicaba como el embodiment. Y vengo a traerles como la experiencia desde la investigación de mi tesis doctoral. Esto es lo que voy a tratar de desarrollar en este corto tiempo. Voy a hablar de la conceptualización del uso de sí, algunas terapéuticas desde fisioterapia que desarrollan el uso de sí, que es el método en el que desarrollé mi tesis doctoral, algunas aplicaciones prácticas y unos resultados breves de la tesis doctoral. Ella es la doctora Sandra Pedraza, antropóloga de la Universidad de los Andes, y creo yo que es una de las personas que más sabe en Latinoamérica sobre estudios del cuerpo. Me encontré con las lecturas de la doctora Sandra Pedraza y encontré que ella divide las técnicas somáticas, movimiento corporal, en dos grandes grupos. Unas son las técnicas somáticas modernas y otras son las técnicas somáticas críticas. Las técnicas somáticas modernas se cimientan en una filosofía dualista que separa el cuerpo de la mente y que subdivide el cuerpo en sistemas y en cosas cuantificables como el rendimiento físico, más fuerza, más flexibilidad, más capacidad aeróbica, y fundamentan su hacer en el cuerpo disciplinado, es decir, que buscan el rendimiento del cuerpo. En este artículo puntual de la estrategia higiénica, la doctora Sandra Pedraza explica cómo el movimiento se ha utilizado a lo largo de la historia para hacer cuerpos y sujetos disciplinados, y de manera paralela, durante el siglo XIX, emergen las técnicas somáticas cuya intención no es desarrollar cuerpos disciplinados o sujetos disciplinados con unas características de rendimiento, sino conocen el cuerpo desde una visión integral o integrativa, es decir, que rompen con el esquema dualista que separa el cuerpo de la mente, sino que ven el cuerpo como cuerpo integral. Entonces, ella, dentro de otro de su producción académica, me encontré con el concepto uso de sí, en inglés de use of self. Es un concepto que desarrolló Matías Alexander a comienzos del siglo XIX. Use of self o el uso de sí, diferencia cómo los sujetos son capaces de usar de una manera más eficiente, de una manera que no genere lesiones, y hace referencia a la conciencia corporal. Entonces, ¿a qué responden las técnicas del uso de sí? Voy a tratar de explicar esta diapositiva de una manera sencilla, pero lo que les quiero decir con ella es que los sistemas científicos que nos hemos desarrollado en Occidente nos han hecho ver que las sensaciones corporales se centran principalmente en las sensaciones exteroceptivas. Las sensaciones exteroceptivas, a resumidas cuentas, son gusto. Sin embargo, dejan de lado otras sensaciones, como las sensaciones interoceptivas, propioceptivas, las kinestésicas y ciertamente las emociones, que también son respuestas cerebrales frente a eventos que tenemos. ¿Qué hace las técnicas somáticas o las técnicas que utilizan el uso de sí? Lo que buscan es que podamos reconocer las sensaciones, no solamente las externas, sino, por ejemplo, las propioceptivas, las kinestésicas e inclusive las emocionales. Cuando tenemos olvidadas las sensaciones propioceptivas, kinestésicas, emocionales y las interoceptivas, tenemos respuestas automáticas de movimiento, lo que el de llama respuestas automáticas de movimiento, que son diferentes a la conciencia corporal. ¿Qué es la conciencia corporal? Cuando tenemos la capacidad de reconocer las sensaciones de nuestro cuerpo, ya les he mencionado algunas, solamente teniendo control sobre estas sensaciones podemos tener control voluntario del movimiento. Entonces, el primer paso para poder tener control voluntario del movimiento es reconocer las sensaciones, es decir, la conciencia del movimiento. Algunos autores han denominado el olvido sobre nosotros mismos como una categoría que se denomina amnesia sensoriomotriz. Olvidamos que tenemos propiocepción, kinestesia y somos como autómatas de movimiento. La investigación que yo realicé en mi tesis doctoral fue en personas con dolor lumbar y con respecto a esta hipótesis teórica que les trato de plantear, se han encontrado personas con dolor lumbar. Hay disminución en el rango de movimiento de la zona lumbofacial, una disminución de la propiocepción y una disminución de la velocidad del movimiento. Adicionalmente, algunas revisiones sistemáticas muestran cómo cambian las funciones del sistema nervioso central, se sensibilizan áreas somatosensoriales y se sensibiliza también la dorsolumbar, más riesgoso la sensación de dolor. ¿Cuáles son las respuestas terapéuticas para responder a la amnesia sensoriomotriz que genera Bloque en algunos casos? Les traigo acá algunos ejemplos. Feldenkrais es uno de ellos. Matías Alexander es otro de ellos. Yo voy a hablar puntualmente de François Messiers, que es una fisioterapeuta francesa. Hay otros movimientos en los países escandinavos como el Basic Therapy o el Norwegian Psychomotor Fisioterapia. Estos tres, Messiers, Basic Body Awareness Therapy o el Norwegian Psychomotor Fisioterapia, son estrategias que han sido desarrolladas desde fisioterapia precisamente para promover la propiocepción y la kinestesia. Se ha encontrado que cuando se promueve la propiocepción y la kinestesia, los pacientes también refieren un bienestar emocional. Estas técnicas de conciencia corporal que promueven el uso de sí o que Sandra Pedraza llama como técnicas somáticas físicas, utilizan la respiración consciente y la conciencia del cuerpo de manera integral, lo que genera al final de la sesión una sensación de bienestar integral. Algunos autores la refieren como una sensación de salutogénesis, un sentido de bienestar que es diferente al que se promueve por medio del ejercicio físico. Entonces, lo sugieren algunas investigaciones, sobre todo del Basic Therapy y del Norwegian Psychomotor Fisioterapia, generan un gran impacto sobre la salud mental de las personas, a pesar de que inicialmente no hayan sido creadas con fines de salud mental, sino con fines de tratar dolencias musculoesqueléticas. Lo que han encontrado es que tienen grandes beneficios para personas con ansiedad, inclusive eventos psicóticos, entre otros. Yo hice mi investigación en el método Messiers y les voy a hablar un poco sobre ello. Ella es François Messiers, una mujer que vivió a lo largo del siglo XX, desarrolló un método de fisioterapia que difería de la fisioterapia o de los principios tradicionales de la fisioterapia, donde ella fue presuntamente una de las primeras en hablar de las musculares. Y bueno, sigue siendo como una teórica que aportó algunos principios. Sin embargo, por ejemplo, en Latinoamérica y en Norteamérica no se conoce mucho sobre esta autora. ¿Qué se hace desde el método Messiers? Se utiliza una terapéutica donde todo el tiempo hay un diálogo pues intercorporal, como todos los hábitos humanos, la intercorporalidad. Pero este diálogo intercorporal con Messieres utiliza diferentes cosas de manera simultánea. El contacto manual utiliza estiramientos musculares globales, utiliza respiración consciente, utiliza conciencia de la postura o del posicionamiento del cuerpo. Todo lo que hace el terapeuta es mediar el consultante para que aprenda a usar el cuerpo de manera pues más consciente, sin tensión muscular, con una mayor eficiencia. Entonces, es una técnica que efectivamente promueve lo que Samantha Harden denominó el uso de sí. Dentro de la terapéutica todo el tiempo lo que se realiza es una entrega de información propioceptiva y kinestésica sobre cómo están dispuestas las partes del cuerpo. Se pregunta dónde se percibe más peso, en qué músculo se percibe más tensión. En este caso, en la imagen, lo que yo estaba preguntándole a la persona es cuál de las dos mi pelvis siente más adelantada que la otra. Se pregunta, no, en la imagen ustedes ven un espejo, pero no se utiliza el espejo, dado que la idea es utilizar información visual, sino que se promueva una información propioceptiva todo el tiempo y kinestésica. Y se realizan preguntas sobre, por ejemplo, cuál hombro percibe más adelantado, cuál percibe más cerca de la oreja, y se desarrolla un concepto que se denomina eutonía, y la eutonía es como el tono perfecto para el músculo, dependiendo del movimiento que esté. También se realiza puesta en tensión de las cadenas musculares. La principal cadena que trabaja François Messieres es la cadena muscular posterior. Y lo que se busca todo el tiempo es encontrar las compensaciones que está generando el cuerpo para escaparse de esa tensión. Entonces, esta posición típica que todos la hemos hecho en algún momento, lo que se hace en este momento es verificar, por ejemplo, si los dos hemitórax se expanden simétricamente, si hay dolor más en uno que en el otro, si hay un cuadrado de los lomos que es más alto que el otro. Todo el tiempo se utiliza el contacto, las manos se utilizan para que una perciba mejor su cuerpo, y pues toda la información se entrega al paciente, a la persona que está. La respiración, se promueve una respiración tranquila y libre. El comando verbal que yo utilizo, por ejemplo, es: imagínese que el aire está por el ombligo y sale por la lumbar tercera. En esta posición también se le pregunta a la persona cómo siente las vértebras en contacto con la superficie del suelo. Se busca que no se active la musculatura del cuello, que la respiración sea completamente diafragmática, que haya una respiración prolongada, entre otros. Una de los requisitos para realizar esta terapéutica es que las personas implicadas en el proceso tienen que estar presentes. Es decir, el terapeuta tiene que estar todo el tiempo vigilante de las compensaciones que realiza la persona, dándole la información. El paciente también tiene que estar todo el tiempo en su cuerpo. Y entonces, en este punto, este tipo de terapia se me asemeja bastante con, está descrito actualmente como el mindfulness, un proceso de atención plena, que al final pues, es como una meditación activa, mediada por un tercero, el terapeuta, y que al final de la terapia el paciente tiene una sensación de estar integral, pues genera beneficios a todos. ¿Qué realicé yo en la investigación? Realicé un estudio mixto convergente donde apliqué un ensayo clínico aleatorizado con dos grupos. A un grupo le apliqué un protocolo de fisioterapia convencional y al otro grupo le apliqué el método Messieres. Lo que estaba buscando en el ensayo clínico era pues, ver si el método Messier es equivalente al protocolo de fisioterapia modal. De manera simultánea al grupo que realizó Messier, realicé una serie de entrevistas y pues yo era quien realizaba las intervenciones en el método Messier. Yo llevé un diario de campo para verificar cuáles eran las narrativas que se construían entre los pacientes y yo como terapeuta, que hacía que la terapéutica fuera eficiente. Les voy a mostrar algunos de los hallazgos. Los hallazgos de la tesis están a punto de publicarse, entonces solamente les traigo como preliminares. Este es el flujograma de los pacientes que fueron incluidos durante el estudio. Al final fue en el grupo de 9 pacientes y en el grupo de fisioterapia convencional 16. Y a grosso modo estos fueron los main outcomes del estudio. El dolor con la escala de numérica del PENDRA, encontré una disminución importante, tanto clínicamente relevante como estadísticamente en los dos grupos. Messier fue mucho mejor, tuvo un tamaño de efecto más potente inmediatamente de haber realizado las 10 sesiones de fisioterapia, pero al final no hubo diferencia importante entre los. Acá hay unos ejemplos de cómo se complementaron los datos cualitativos con los cuantitativos. Entonces, por ejemplo, para la variable dolor, existe una categoría central que fue calma en el dolor, y el 100% de las entrevistas que hicieron método Messier afirmaron que el dolor había calmado. Y acá tengo un ejemplo de cita, donde una paciente dice, yo sí le pongo una cantidad de mejoría del dolor de un 70%. Entonces, una vez a la semana, una vez al mes, yo creo que es un gran avance. Aquí, con respecto a la discapacidad, con el cuestionario de Roland Morris, porque esta paciente dice, a levantarse es más fácil, no se siente ese dolor que es importante, me iba a reventar la espalda cuando iba a levantarme y ya me estaba acostumbrando ese dolor. Ahora me estoy acostumbrando a no sentirlo cuando estoy haciendo algo mal. Este fue el mapa de categorías que emergieron de todas las entrevistas. En el centro del gráfico ustedes pueden ver como la presentación más importante de las categorías. El método Messier es percibido por los pacientes como un proceso de enseñanza-aprendizaje, donde primero el consultante debe tener la disposición de aprender, y ser que alguien no tenga la disposición de aprender sobre su cuerpo, pues necesita otro tipo de terapeuta. Pero finalmente el terapeuta debe tener algunas herramientas pedagógicas que faciliten el control. La intención de esta terapéutica es desarrollar la conciencia corporal para generar control voluntario o uso de sí, y al final se llega a la calma del dolor por medio de encontrar mejor equilibrio en el cuerpo, menor gasto energético y posiciones más confortables para el cuerpo. Esto es a grosso modo lo que encontramos en los datos cualitativos. Y tengo dos citas que me parecen importantes dentro del estudio, que me parecen relevantes. Entonces acá les doy una de ellas. Yo digo que puedo soportar cualquier dolor, menos el de la espalda, porque llega un punto donde no podía dormir. Y bueno, no sé, la EPS, he sentido la diferencia, me ha funcionado. No me ha dicho como no puedes hacer, me ha dicho haz esto para que. He sentido el cambio total, pero no solo en la espalda donde he sentido el cambio. Creo es lo que más me ha gustado, sino ha habido cambios inesperados en la postura, en los brazos, en las piernas, en el cuello, en la cadera, o sea, en muchas partes. Y yo digo como, wow, que no todo se soluciona con medicamentos y medicamentos, sino que hay medidas no farmacológicas que de verdad hacen mucho más que el medicamento. Porque el medicamento puede tratar el dolor en el momento, pero no está tratando la causa, que era lo que estaba pasando en mi caso. Acá hay otra cita para Para ejemplificar, más corto. Este paciente dice, es como si mi cuerpo dijera, uy, sí, mira, entonces me parece rico porque son cosas que uno nunca las supo. Olvídate, eso nunca lo había sentido. Entonces digo, ay, yo me quedaría aquí todo el tiempo haciendo esto. Porque ese reconocimiento del cuerpo, y como uno lo entiende, esa relajación es como si el músculo te dijera a uno, por fin me miró, no jodas, sea chévere que me toque. Entonces, los trabajos son los que me parecen deliciosos por la forma en que te conectas con el cuerpo. Entonces, al trabajarlo, te sientes que el cuerpo te dijera, oye, qué chévere, ¿por qué me miraste? Yo soy usted. Y pues esto era lo que les quería contar el día de hoy. Felicidades al grupo de investigación de Movimiento Humano por sus 10 años y muchas gracias por su atención.
Muchas gracias a la doctora Alfonso por su presentación y le deseamos muchos éxitos en su trabajo. Continuamos con el cronograma de conferencias para el día de hoy. Seguidamente tendremos el privilegio de escuchar al doctor Odir Rodríguez Villagra. La conferencia del doctor Rodríguez se titula Efectos de una sesión de ejercicio físico moderado sobre la memoria de trabajo. El doctor Odir Rodríguez obtuvo su doctorado en la Universidad de Potsdam, en Alemania. Posee una maestría en Ciencias Cognitivas de la Universidad de Costa Rica y una licenciatura en Psicología de la Universidad Católica de Costa Rica. Actualmente es director del Centro de Investigación en Neurociencias y fue director del Programa de Posgrado en Ciencias Cognitivas de la Universidad de Costa Rica. Además, es investigador del Instituto de Investigaciones Psicológicas y profesor de la Escuela de Psicología de la Universidad de Costa Rica. El profesor Rodríguez inició sus trabajos de investigación en modelos animales de depresión y ansiedad en el desarrollo de pruebas psicométricas. Actualmente sus estudios se enfocan en comprender los factores que limitan la capacidad de memoria de trabajo y los procesos que ayudan con el mantenimiento de la información. Ha sido ganador de múltiples fondos de investigación y su investigación ha sido publicada en importantes revistas internacionales de psicología experimental, neurociencias y ciencias afines. Escuchamos entonces al doctor Rodríguez. Le recibimos con un fuerte aplauso.
Buenos días, muchas gracias por la invitación y es un honor estar por acá compartiendo este trabajo que se desarrolló en el contexto de una tesis del estudiante Brian Montero del posgrado en Ciencias Cognitivas. Ese es el trabajo de él y aquí yo les voy a compartir algunos resultados de ese trabajo. Entonces, de nuevo reitero mi agradecimiento por la invitación y para celebrar pues, este evento tan importante. Voy a empezar entonces con, nada más para ver cómo hacia allá, okay. Y para señalar, esta de arriba, no se ve mucho. Ok, y aquí me puedo señalar. No pasa. Okay. Bueno. Creo que para este momento es claro que nadie tiene duda de la importancia que tiene el ejercicio sobre la salud mental y sobre el funcionamiento del cerebro. A modo de resumen, sabemos que disminuye los niveles de estrés, de ansiedad, libera endorfinas, lo que promueve una sensación de bienestar, ralentiza la aparición de enfermedades neurodegenerativas, impulsa la creatividad, mejora la autoestima y potencia ciertas habilidades cognitivas, entre ellas memoria, atención y concentración. Sin embargo, la relación entre el ejercicio y la cognición es difícil de entender. Sabemos que esa relación está moderada por diversos factores. Por ejemplo, la intensidad a la cual se realiza el ejercicio, se sabe que tiene una variación. ¿Qué quiere decir eso? Ejercicio bajo intensidad baja se ha encontrado o no se ha encontrado efectos o incluso a veces pues efectos nulos. Cuando la intensidad es moderada es cuando se encuentra en general un mayor impacto sobre diversas funciones cognitivas, y cuando es alta a veces incluso se encuentra una disminución. Sin embargo, no solo la intensidad afecta esta relación, sino que también el tipo de ejercicio, si es crónico o es agudo, el momento del día en el cual se realiza la actividad, el tipo de ejercicio, si es aeróbico o contrarresistencia, el tiempo en el cual se hace el análisis del impacto, que puede ser durante o post la sesión de ejercicio, y también la población. Ahora bien, algunos se preguntarán, ¿qué hace un psicólogo cognitivo experimental en esto? Yo me he dedicado a entender los mecanismos que hacen que nosotros como seres humanos no podamos mantener más información en memoria. Eso lo he hecho a través de modelación matemática y formal, y mucho de la investigación básica que he desarrollado, yo trato de que esas herramientas se puedan aplicar en diversos contextos, y ahí es donde viene la colaboración con la parte de la actividad física. Ahora, ¿por qué este trabajo está centrado en lo que es el estudio de la memoria de trabajo? Ahí ustedes pueden ver una serie de modelos y muchos de los estudios que se han realizado de ejercicio y cognición tienen que ver con procesos como funciones ejecutivas y específicamente aspectos relacionados como la inhibición. Pero la inhibición tiene una particularidad, es uno de los procesos que yo también estudio. Se usa mucho. Sin embargo, cuando queremos estudiar qué es lo que hay detrás de la inhibición, podemos ver ese artículo de ahí abajo en adultos que dice, dejemos de investigar en esto, porque parece que cada tarea de inhibición lo que captura son particularidades, y cuando usted quiere encontrar una dimensión latente, no lo encuentra. En un trabajo uno de esos autores fue también mi tutor en Alemania, que nosotros también desarrollamos, yo creo que no es exactamente de esa manera, no podemos dejar de pensar en la inhibición. Y entonces, en un estudio en colaboración con colegas de España, logramos demostrar que a partir de 8 tareas de inhibición, que son muy representativas en el campo de la investigación, efectivamente esas tareas no solo capturan inhibición, sino que también capturan procesos de velocidad de procesamiento y de memoria de trabajo. Pero aún así, luego de extraer todo eso que tiene que ver con memoria de trabajo y velocidad de procesamiento, logramos encontrar una cosita pequeña que nosotros denominamos inhibición. Entonces, cuando tenemos estudios en ejercicio con tareas particulares, en realidad tenemos muchas dudas de qué exactamente está detrás de esa tarea. Y básicamente que esos resultados solo se pueden generalizar al paradigma empleado. Esa particularidad de las funciones ejecutivas sucede con inhibición y lo que es flexibilidad cognitiva. Sin embargo, con memoria de trabajo, de estas 3 funciones ejecutivas, es la única que sí es consistentemente, que demuestra consistencia a nivel pues, de variable latente. Entonces, nos vamos a centrar en este trabajo en el estudio de esta relación. Primero que todo, a partir de diversos metaanálisis se ha encontrado unos pocos estudios que demuestran que hay un efecto del ejercicio agudo sobre la memoria de trabajo, pero muchos de los trabajos fallan en encontrar en ese efecto. Una de las razones es las variables moderadoras que yo les he estado mencionando, el tipo de tarea de memoria de trabajo, mientras que en el ejercicio crónico sí hay más estabilidad. Ya ahí se encuentran los efectos aparecen de manera más continua y son menos susceptibles de esas variables moderadoras. ¿Qué buscamos en este trabajo? Tratando de entender el efecto del ejercicio agudo, podemos ir conociendo la transición hacia el crónico y así entender la relación del ejercicio con la memoria. Yo particularmente, desde la trinchera mía, pienso que conocer el efecto del ejercicio me va a ayudar a entender por qué tenemos límites en la capacidad de la memoria de trabajo. Entonces, el objetivo de este trabajo es conocer los mecanismos que subyacen a la relación entre el ejercicio agudo y la memoria. También examinar el efecto de una sesión de ejercicio de intensidad moderada en bicicleta estacionaria sobre diferentes componentes de la memoria de trabajo, eficiencia y capacidad de memoria de trabajo. Este paradigma que que yo les voy a mostrar lo he desarrollado desde hace varios años y aquí pues lo hemos usado en diversas áreas. Y finalmente evaluar el papel de los mecanismos relacionados con los límites de la capacidad de la memoria de trabajo en el ejercicio agudo. ¿Qué es la memoria de trabajo? Como ustedes pueden ver por ahí, la memoria de trabajo hace referencia no a un almacén, sino que en realidad las representaciones en nuestro cerebro están interconectadas y la memoria de trabajo lo que refleja es esas representaciones que están disponibles de manera más fácil cuando estamos haciendo una tarea. Y esa disponibilidad es de 4 más menos 1 objetos en memoria. Entonces, simplemente son representaciones que tenemos disponibles. La memoria de trabajo no solo nos ayuda a mantener información, sino que es a crear y manipularla. Por ejemplo, si yo les digo una secuencia de números como 2, 8, 5, 4, 1, 3, 2. Ok, tal vez los pueden repetir hacia adelante. Ahora díganlos hacia atrás. Ese proceso lo mantiene el sistema que estamos hablando ahora, la memoria de trabajo. Ahí ya no es solo repetir una secuencia, sino que tenemos que reorganizarla y es 3, 2, 1, 4, 5, 8, 2, ¿verdad? Yo sí me lo sé porque es el mismo ejemplo que uso siempre, entonces no crean que, que bajo estas condiciones siempre lo puedo hacer. Si me dan otro número ya no lo recordaré, no lo podré decir tan fácilmente. Pero vean que no solo es mantener información de manera pasiva, sino que ya sabemos que la memoria de trabajo es el mejor predictor de habilidades de razonamiento, comprensión del lenguaje, inteligencia fluida. Pero va más allá de eso. Sabemos hoy día, y ese es un trabajo que tenemos en revisión, que la memoria de trabajo, y en este caso, es un componente fundamental y que sirve como pivot para un montón de procesos cognitivos que son fundamentales en los procesos de adaptación social, que es esto lo que les estoy mostrando acá. Es predictor de habilidades de teoría de la mente, inteligencia fluida, de afectiva empatía, y todo eso es fundamental para ver cómo las personas se adaptan a diferentes contextos. Esto es solo un ejemplo de que el estudio de la memoria de trabajo va más allá de entender cuestiones de tipo académico, sino que incluso está relacionado con aspectos como los estados depresivos, por ejemplo, están asociados con una disminución de la capacidad de remover los pensamientos negativos. Entonces, hay mucho todavía que estudiar en esta área y que de hecho falta por hacer. ¿Qué me interesa a mí en este trabajo? Entender por qué no podemos recordar más de 4 estímulos. ¿Qué es lo que nos hace olvidar eso? Y hay 2 grandes perspectivas. Una, la que habla de interferencia por sobreescritura y superposición, que es una posición que yo he trabajado y defendido durante varios años, y la de Barrullé, que es como con el grupo que hay cierta guerra, ¿verdad? Académica, por supuesto. Pero en este trabajo lo que interesantemente encontramos es de Barrullé, y aunque no comparto toda la perspectiva de la teoría de él, por lo menos el efecto que él reporta es sumamente robusto, y de eso vamos a hablar acá. ¿De qué se trata este estudio? Es un estudio en el que tenemos este conjunto de participantes, 157, con 4 grupos experimentales. El que dice X30, C30, X60 y C60. X se refiere a ejercicio, C a control. Y específicamente es un diseño en el que después de hacer una actividad tienen unas características particulares que ahorita voy a mencionar. Características generales de la muestra. A estas personas, para tener un conocimiento general de ellos, les aplicamos una serie de pruebas de inteligencia fluida, sustitución de dígitos y símbolos y una batería, bueno, más bien los componentes de una prueba que se llama POMS. Y lo que podemos ver aquí simplemente es que los 4 grupos tienen una distribución muy similar de esas características, lo que nos garantiza que la aleatorización que hicimos, pues distribuyó esos procesos de manera, pues, equitativa. ¿En qué consiste el diseño experimental? Ahí podemos ver de arriba hacia abajo el primer grupo, el cual dice X30. Esas personas hicieron estas escalas que son control, hicieron una prueba de memoria de trabajo que ahora voy a describir y 30 minutos de ejercicio de intensidad moderada. en una bicicleta estacionaria. Después de eso, 30 minutos después volvieron a hacer la prueba de memoria de trabajo y una escala para otro aspecto. Durante esos 30 minutos tomaron un baño y vieron un video si les quedó tiempo. El segundo grupo es un grupo control, en donde en vez de estar en la bicicleta estacionaria simplemente vieron un video de lo importante que es el ejercicio. En el tercer grupo, X60, hacen también 30 minutos de ejercicio, pero tienen 60 minutos de descanso y posteriormente hacen la prueba de memoria de trabajo. Y el último grupo tiene pues 30 minutos de video más 60 minutos de descanso. Ese es el diseño experimental. Las personas fueron asignadas de manera aleatoria a las condiciones que les acabo de describir. ¿Qué tipo de tarea fue la que hicimos? Esta tarea básicamente lo que hace es lo siguiente. Ustedes pueden ver, no sé si se logra ver aquí el puntito, pero si nos vamos a esta primera imagen, las personas tienen que codificar la posición espacial de esa estrella por 2000 milisegundos. Luego de eso aparece una flecha. Esa flecha indica que se debe mover la estrella de la posición inicial en la dirección señalada. Entonces la estrella va a pasar de ese cuadrito al siguiente. La persona responde con el mouse y eso es lo que está representado en gris. Es el tiempo de actualización. Después de ese tiempo de actualización se multiplica por 0.015 en esa condición y hay un pequeño espacio en blanco que ahora vamos a ver de qué se trata. Y así sucesivamente. Cuando llega la última actualización, la tarea es recordar la última posición del estímulo. Después viene otro estímulo y aparecen ahora en este caso flechas rojas. Las flechas rojas indican mover el estímulo en la posición opuesta a la señalada y tratan de modelar una respuesta incompatible. Y bueno, después se presenta otro estímulo y vean que los ensayos pueden tener flechas rojas, negras o rojas y negras. Y al final se pregunta por la localización espacial de los estímulos. Yo no sé si yo podría le pueden dar clic al video que se ve ahí de la prueba. Dura unos cuantos segundos porque desde aquí no puedo. Si no puedo continuar. Entonces no sé si... Ok. Ok, esa es la tarea. Entre cada flecha hay unos espacios en blanco que son los que están denotados ahí. Vean la condición de abajo. Hay unos espacios en blanco más amplios. Esa es una manipulación experimental que les voy a explicar a continuación. Bueno, una de las cosas que modelamos son las flechas, el color de las flechas. Las negras miden el proceso de actualización. Las rojas básicamente lo que hacen es modelar inhibición de procesos y las mixtas tienen inhibición de procesos y cambio de tarea y tratan de reflejar flexibilidad cognitiva. La otra manipulación que es crítica para este estudio es la de la carga cognitiva. Matemáticamente la proporción de tiempo en la que una tarea captura la atención entre el tiempo total de todo el ensayo. Y básicamente lo que la carga cognitiva refleja es que a mayor tiempo en gris, mayor carga cognitiva comparado con el blanco, como eso que ustedes ven ahí. ¿Qué es lo que propone esta teoría? Esta teoría propone que cuando estamos haciendo una actualización, por ejemplo, yo estoy actualizando la luna, que es el segundo estímulo, yo no puedo, mientras la actualizo, repasar los otros estímulos. Entonces, ¿qué va a pasar? Según esta teoría, la activación de la representación en la memoria de trabajo va a empezar a decaer. Cuando llego a un espacio en blanco, tiempo libre, yo automáticamente puedo volver a actualizarlas. Y entonces, ya se ha demostrado de manera robusta que esta manipulación produce una disminución del rendimiento de las personas. Entonces, ¿qué es lo que se asume? Que cuando yo tengo más espacios en blanco, es decir, una carga cognitiva más baja, tengo más tiempo para refrescar y entonces la probabilidad de olvidar es menor. Básicamente lo que produce un modelo computacional es algo como lo que vemos ahí. Hay un estímulo que cuando está en la fase gris decae su activación, pero en los espacios blancos yo logro actualizar y refrescarlo y entonces puedo recordarlo. Y ahí vemos los ejemplos para los otros estímulos. Variables del estudio. Como variable dependiente tenemos el recuerdo de los estímulos al final del ensayo y los tiempos de respuesta. Y variables independientes tenemos los grupos, el color de las flechas y la carga cognitiva, que tiene dos condiciones, alta y baja. Para poder corroborar, yo esto lo he trabajado en múltiples ocasiones y he encontrado los efectos, pero queríamos un estudio que fuera idéntico al de este trabajo, pero independiente. Entonces, ¿qué? Hicimos un estudio independiente. Ahí vemos la mejor manera de graficar esto, pero usualmente a veces no es tan sencillo representar los efectos. Y aquí vemos los primeros hallazgos. Primero vemos aquí de izquierda a derecha que las flechas, en términos de proporción de respuestas correctas, las flechas mixtas es las que tienen el menor porcentaje de recuperación, pero no son diferentes de las rojas, sin embargo son diferentes de las negras. En términos de carga cognitiva, ven el efecto, se encuentra lo que esperábamos. Cuando la carga cognitiva es alta, es decir, cuando tengo poco espacio para repasar los estímulos, se disminuye, y cuando tengo más espacio es mayor. Y con respecto a los tiempos de respuesta, como uno esperaba, las flechas negras requieren menos tiempo, alrededor de 1200 milisegundos, 1250, mientras que las flechas mixtas 1400 aproximadamente, y las otras 1400 y un poquitito. No son muy diferentes estas dos entre sí. Ese es el estudio preliminar. Ahora tenemos, el estudio. Los resultados del pretest, porque hicimos un pretest y un posttest, reflejan un patrón muy similar al que les acabo de demostrar del estudio independiente, con la misma tarea, con los mismos parámetros. Entonces, eso nos asegura que se replica en el pretest el primer hallazgo, que ya habíamos hecho nosotros. Es decir, se muestra el efecto de las flechas, la carga cognitiva, de hecho el tamaño de efecto quizás es un poquito más grande, y aquí es muy similar. Esto es el pretest ya para los 4 grupos. Vemos que en los 4 grupos existen diferencias. Esos son intervalos de confianza del 95% corregidos mediante la fórmula de Murray 2008, y entonces son relativamente precisos. Cuando ellos se traslapan un poquitito, probablemente es un valor P si uno menor a 0.001, ¿verdad? Entonces, pero aquí en ninguno de esos casos se traslapa en el pretest. Nosotros hicimos esto como modelos mixtos o multinivel, y utilizamos como criterios para toma de decisión de modelos el AIC y la devianza. En este caso, básicamente usamos los delta AIC, y nos indican en ese modelo que el modelo 2 y el 3 son los mejores. Básicamente el modelo 2 y 3 son virtualmente idénticos, y entonces se podrían interpretar cualquiera de esos dos. Y voy a mostrarles los gráficos que describen este modelo en vez del modelo para ser un poco más rápido con esto. ¿Qué encontramos? Y es lo que a mí, por lo menos a mí me llamó la atención primero. Con 30 minutos de actividad física moderada en bicicleta estacionaria, se desapareció el efecto de la carga cognitiva. Es decir, esos espacios reducidos ya no disminuyeron la capacidad de recordar la información. Entonces, aquí vemos una relación entre mecanismos que nosotros estudiamos para entender la memoria y el ejercicio físico. Y vean qué interesante. Hay que investigar más, hace que las representaciones sean menos susceptibles al pasar del tiempo. Entonces, hay que seguir investigando eso de manera más detallada. Ese es uno de los primeros hallazgos. Las líneas rojas es el estimado del pre. Los puse ahí nada más para que vean que siempre todos mejoraron del pre al post. Todos mejoraron. Pero el interesante hallazgo es que ya la carga cognitiva, el efecto ese, no aparece más. ¿Qué pasó con los tiempos de respuesta? Nuevamente encontramos un modelo en el que una interacción entre el grupo y las flechas era el mejor descriptor de los resultados. ¿Y qué se encontró? Primero, pareciera haber una disminución en la velocidad para actualizar las representaciones. Y el otro hallazgo que demuestra la interacción, que aquí no está detallado, es que en la mayoría de grupos las flechas mixtas y las rojas gastan más tiempo, toman más tiempo, pero en los grupos de ejercicio esta diferencia tiende a desaparecerse. Entonces también nos está diciendo que quizás tiene un efecto específico sobre los procesos de inhibición, además de uno global en disminuir la velocidad de procesamiento. Bueno, esos son ya unos resultados generales que no voy a pues ahora detallar por acá. Y para ir terminando, este estudio examinó la relación entre una sesión de ejercicio agudo y sus posibles efectos sobre diferentes componentes de la memoria de trabajo. Evaluó el efecto de las condiciones experimentales y su interacción con la carga cognitiva sobre la capacidad de la memoria de trabajo. Replicamos el efecto de la carga cognitiva en un estudio independiente en el pretest y en el estudio independiente y en el pretest. El análisis de datos sugiere que una sesión de ejercicio moderado elimina el efecto de la carga cognitiva sobre la memoria de trabajo. Los hallazgos de ese trabajo sugieren que una sesión de ejercicio moderado incrementa la velocidad a la que se actualizan las representaciones en memoria de trabajo. Además, se encontró un aumento de la velocidad para actualizar las representaciones en condiciones en las que se deben procesar estímulos que indican generación de respuestas no dominantes. Y creo que lo más importante es que el presente estudio constituye un pequeño paso para entender los mecanismos que subyacen a la influencia del ejercicio agudo moderado sobre la memoria de trabajo. Esto, a su vez, podría contribuir en la comprensión de los mecanismos que subyacen al efecto del ejercicio crónico, es decir, de agudo a crónico, ¿qué va pasando? Y creo que este podría ser un primer paso en poder entender ese efecto. Muchas gracias y bueno, este trabajo pues debe agradecérsele a estos grupos, al CIMOHU, al CEP, a EDUFI y estas personas que estuvieron involucradas en el proceso de la tesis de Brian Montero y que pues obviamente son y fueron partes fundamentales para esta investigación. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos al doctor Odir Rodríguez por tan excelente presentación. Y continuando, tenemos al doctor Chris Minson con su presentación Novel Uses of HEAT to Improve Health and Athletic Performance. A manera de introducción, el doctor Minson ha realizado investigación en el tema de adaptación humana en ambientes extremos, salud cardiovascular y regulación vascular autonómica por más de 20 años. Esto en el Departamento de Fisiología Humana de la Universidad de Oregón. Su investigación actual se enfoca en los beneficios para la salud de la exposición ambiental para el tratamiento de enfermedades metabólicas y cardiovasculares. Además, se enfoca en la fisiología del rendimiento atlético y ha trabajado con múltiples equipos deportivos profesionales, atletas olímpicos y deportistas a nivel universitario alrededor del mundo para su preparación y competición en ambientes extremos. Le damos la bienvenida al doctor Minson con un fuerte aplauso.
Buenos días. Thank you very much for the invitation to come speak. It is always an absolute honor for me to return to Costa Rica, and especially to Universidad de Costa Rica. So thank you so very much for the invitation. I love the country, I love the people, I love this place. So very much my honor. I want to show a quick picture of kind of my home, if you will. I'm from Eugene, Oregon, and we have a large history in that town for track and field. And we have what we call the historic Hayward Field. I put that in quotes because the historic field was knocked down about 3 years ago, and it was very difficult for those track and field fans to see that history go away. But we also got a new stadium here, and we hosted the World Championships for track and field last June, and in preparation for that, they built this incredible stadium. It's one of the few stadiums in the world that is specifically for athletics or track and field. No football, no soccer, nothing else, just track and field. I'm lucky enough that my new laboratory is in this corner over here. You can't quite see it, but that's, so I have a great new facility in there with a couple of my colleagues. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the concepts behind exercise-induced adaptations. And the reason for this is I'm a cardiovascular physiologist, but as most people tell you, I create a lot of stress for people. And sometimes that's the good stress, sometimes that's not the good stress. But when we think of exercise, we know exercise is a stress. After we exercise, we are weaker than we were before we exercised acutely. But why then, when we exercise with our legs, do the blood vessels in our arms become healthier? Right? That's a question we've been interested in for quite a while. We know that when you exercise, you have all these different stressors that happen: thermal, metabolic, hypoxic, oxidative, mechanical, inflammatory, and many others as well. However, if we are then allowed to recover, right, then we have these, during exercise, after exercise, we have this activation of these biochemical messengers. Heat shock proteins, reactive oxygen species, growth factors, many different markers in the blood flow patterns change. But if we then recover from that, then we know that we can have performance adaptations. And of course, as we've heard from many speakers already, we can have health adaptations as well. But I want to talk about heat specifically. So of those adaptations, of those stressors I mentioned, and we use all of those in various forms in our laboratories to look at both acute and chronic adaptations to stress. Heat is my favorite. And humans have an amazing ability to adapt to heat stress. In fact, our ability to adapt to stress has really shaped part of human evolution. So historically, humans would be able to run down on a very hot, dry day animals that are much, much faster than us. If you even go outside and try and catch a squirrel, you probably can't do it, right? But under the right conditions, by keeping the animal moving constantly, we can make them overheat, and we can, because humans are so adapted to hot, dry environments, that we can keep them running, keep them moving, and eventually just walk up and have dinner. And so it's still in some small cultures, including the Raramuri in the Copper Canyon of Chihuahua in Mexico, also still engage in some of this persistence hunting. But if we move on to modern day, we have these new hunters, people hunting victory and glory, and so there's incredible races now, these ultra marathons people are running, similar to this Badwater 135-mile race. It goes through the hot desert. It's easily 40 to 45 degrees Celsius on the tarmac there, and if you're one of the Americans here, that's like 110 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, so very, very, very hot, right? And yet they're performing. They're not only performing there, they're running. Brenda Guanjado here is running 135 miles, and each of her miles in the heat is faster than I can run a mile. So it's really, really impressive what humans can do, what we can adapt to in the heat. So if we talk about heat adaptation, there's of course the classic idea of heat acclimation, and that's these short-term heat acclimation adaptations. Almost every single heat acclimation protocol you look at in the literature is almost like 10 days, 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer. But there's very few a little longer than that. But Mikhail Horowitz from Israel started this idea and did some very early animal and human work looking at this phase 2, this longer-term heat acclimation. And what she's shown is that with this long-term heat application, which can be anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks to 8 weeks to months and even years, we get these other adaptations, more metabolic alterations, improved cellular function, cytoprotection, improved inflammatory factors, many other factors associated with that. So we've taken kind of her ideas, and I've worked with her in some aspects, to apply those to both health and performance. So I have 2 questions I was asked to speak on today. First, can we exploit the adaptive responses to heat exposure to improve human health? And second, can we exploit the adaptive responses to heat exposure to improve exercise performance? So let's talk first about the health side. So I think everyone knows here that we've got a problem in the world, right? Cardiovascular disease is rampant in the United States. In Costa Rica, cardiovascular diseases are 3 of the top 5 causes of death. And of course, in both countries, metabolic syndrome is a major problem and contributes to it. In addition, both countries have an aging population, and both countries have dramatic increases in metabolic diseases. So many problems that we need to be addressing. So, and of course, we've heard from Dr. Harden earlier that there's a lot of stress in the world, and it was already stress rates and mental disorders were already rapidly on the rise, and then we had this little thing called the pandemic. And now people are trying to recover from the pandemic, and people are still more stressed out, more anxiety than they ever have been in their entire life. And so we know that there's this huge anxiety, chronic depression, stress problem that relates back to our body, our cardiovascular health, our metabolic disease, all these things. And we know when these things are bad, they circle back here. So we've got this chronic problem of having great increases in anxiety and depression and mental health disease that relates back to our cardiovascular disease. And so, what are we going to do about it, right? Sorry, some things aren't coming up the way they were supposed to, but that's all right. I gave you the answer right here. Everyone knew this answer anyway. How can we prevent cardiovascular and metabolic diseases? First answer is exercise. We have no pill. We've got no product. We've got nothing we can do besides exercise. That is as good as exercise, I should say. However, there are also many patient populations that have limited ability to respond to exercise. The elderly, the frail, people with heart failure, peripheral artery disease, where it's very painful to exercise, spinal cord injury, your spinal cord injured athletes, their cardiovascular system is never as healthy as equal athlete, an able-bodied athlete, and that's really very unfortunate. Amputees, I was lucky enough to visit the amazing cancer center, cancer research center yesterday. And cancer patients are ones that exercise is showing to be very, very important for them, but it's so difficult for them to get exercising after what they're going through. So we really need alternatives. We need also adjunctives, things that we can do to get people to get healthy enough to exercise. And so what is the answer for that? Or one answer for that? Heat therapy, right? Who wouldn't want to hang out with these ladies? And I just hang out with them, you're going to be healthier. And so that's been our focus, is to really focus on heat therapy as one adjunctive to exercise. And so Dr. Rodriguez just spoke about some of the acute effects, right, and how it can help brain function, and I'll touch on that a little bit too. But like exercise, we know that repetitive acute stress may lead to long-term adaptation. And so very similar to exercise, heat has the exact same responses here. So if you raise your body temperature up acutely, we know that you're going to see increases in heart rate, cardiac output, blood flow, increased shear stress. That's the way blood flow moves through the blood vessels. We know in a healthy pattern, this works in having healthier blood vessels. Increased body temperature, we activate these heat shock proteins, which are really, really important, and they create cellular adaptations. We also know that following exercise, we have acute reductions in blood pressure. We have increased mood, decreased anxiety, and improved mental health. And if we have these stresses, what we consider stresses negative, these are stresses that with enough relaxation, recovery, and then repeat it. Stress, recovery, repeat. We get these chronic adaptations, right? That's why exercise is beneficial to us. And we believe the same thing with heat therapy. So this concept of using heat therapy is not new, not even close. Similar to the first talk again by Dr. Harden, that yoga is not new, right? But it's the application that we're looking for new. So there's many examples from the culture of the world, history of the world, of heat therapy being beneficial, but we've kind of forgotten some of the important aspects. So if you look at modern types of heat therapy, there's many different ways. There is still traditional sauna, including now far infrared, hot water immersion technique. We use both these a lot. Exercise in a hot room, we use this a lot for athletes. Steam rooms, and of course microwave diathermy as well, it's used in rehabilitation clinics. There's other forms as well of heat therapy, but these are the ones that are really starting to get the most attention and the most use. So our personal intervention is to, for many of the studies that I'll summarize today, is we put people in hot water, and we've used it a little more than sauna, although now we're using sauna a lot more, just because in the United States there's a lot more hot tubs than there are saunas available. And so we put people in the hot water. We do it for anywhere between 30 to 60 minutes. We put them in the heat. We have them up to their shoulders until their body temperature gets to about 38. Then we have them sit upright, and we can therefore maintain their body temperature over about 38 or 38.5 for a period of time. Our interventions have typically been 30 to 36 sessions over 8 to 10 weeks, and we always take measurements before, midpoint, and after the interventions. So it's kind of the model we've used, and we're replicating this also with different types of sauna. So our experimental designs, we've used a number of different subject populations, but most of our work has been in the sedentary. We have a large clinical trial going on right now with people who are hypertensive. We also have one looking at people who are obese, and we've published previously in an area of interest of mine, which is women with polycystic ovary syndrome and endocrine disorder. And well, we have some studies going on with the aging. And in these two groups, the hypertensive and the older, we're also looking at biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease. Well, hopefully that'll become clear why we're doing that. So our general model is to, well, first we randomize our subjects to their groups, either experimental or sham. We then take all these different biomarkers. I won't go through all of them, but things like endothelial function, arterial stiffness. We're looking at some measures of metabolic function. We're direct recordings of sympathetic activity. We take adipose as well as skeletal muscle biopsies. We then also take many biomarkers in the blood. We've also harvested endothelial cells or used cell culture models in which to look at the pathways by which heat therapy may be causing benefits. We then put them through the interventions, and then we test them all again. And collectively, we're going really from the very basic science of how heat therapy may be beneficial all the way to the clinical outcomes. So, in the interest of time, so I have a lot to cover. I want to just kind of give some summary slides as opposed to going through individual data. But I can tell you that through the number of our studies from our lab, as well as an increasing number of labs throughout the country and the world, and hopefully in Costa Rica as well, we're starting to see a lot more interest in this heat therapy. And I think there's a lot of applications for it that could be applied here in Costa Rica. But what we're seeing are, this is after 10 to 12 weeks of heat therapy, we're seeing reduced blood pressure, improved endothelium-dependent dilation. This means healthier, more reactive blood vessels. We're seeing reduced arterial stiffness. We're seeing lowered sympathetic outflow. And the sum of all this is we're seeing robust improvements in cardiovascular health following heat therapy. And again, this is heat therapy in the absence of exercise. We're also seeing many changes on the metabolic health side of things. Reduced inflammation in adipose tissue, improved insulin signaling and skeletal muscle in adipose tissue, as well as improved glucose and glucose regulation following oral glucose tolerance tests and hemoglobin A1C. And we're seeing all these changes in the absence of weight loss. So it's pretty powerful that some results we're seeing. Bottom line from all this, we're seeing robust improvements in metabolic health in addition to cardiovascular health adjustments. So the question, though, you're probably asking is, well, great, you see this in the lab, does that mean anything, right? We're hoping to move into some of the clinical and the community as well as home-based application of this. But if we look to what the Scandinavian countries have done, especially Finland, we can get the question a little bit, do these improvements in biomarkers of vascular function and their pathways translate into meaningful reductions in disease or death? So this is data from this ischemic heart disease study, and this is a prospective study, meaning people were enrolled and then they followed them for over 25 years. And what they're looking for was death, right? Death rates, not disease progression, not biomarkers, but death, muerto, end of life, under the ground. And so that's what they're looking at here. And these are our hazard index, so the risk of dying, right, over time. And they did a lot of controls to look at socioeconomic status and exercise and other aspects, all at inception here. And you will notice this is from 2,315 middle-aged men. What's missing there? Women. Well, they didn't study women in this, right? Major problem, major problem. So I can't explain why that is, but we need many more studies in women, so that's a problem. But looking at this data first off, you can see this is sauna frequency per week. There's no control group because everyone in Finland has some sauna. So if you go 1 time per week versus 2 to 3 times per week versus 4 to 7 times per week, your risk of cardiovascular and other related deaths is much higher. So the more you do, the better. If we look again, another slide should come up. Okay, well, the next slide here that should have come up would show your the duration per session. So the longer session you do each time is going to have a similar changes as you see here. So really big differences. The bottom line here is that both frequency and duration per session of sauna use were associated with reduced cardiovascular mortality, sudden cardiovascular death, death, hypertension, and in separate studies, they've shown improvements in Alzheimer's disease risk as well. So again, really, really powerful, and this is a very, very powerful study. There are some limitations to it, of course. I mentioned only one of them, other ones too, but at least it's a very nice collective study, and there's more data coming in from this group as well. So hopefully I've convinced you at least that there are some real health benefits that need to be more explored and more applied from heat therapy for health perspectives. But now let's get to the second question, which I'm looking at with, can we exploit the adaptive response to heat exposure to improve exercise performance? And I love working with athletes. I love working with sports teams. It's just a very fun part of my job in addition to working with the clinical populations. And you know, if I tell you if we heat acclimate people, they're going to do better in a hot event. We all know that, right? It's been known for a long time. And these are like some of those adaptations we see with the classic heat acclimation of about 14 days or so. Decreased cardiovascular strain at a given level of exercise, increased performance and thermotolerance in a hot environment. None of that surprising. We've known that for a long time. But I was asked to help get some athletes prepared for Beijing Olympics in 2008. And we were looking at some elite marathoners. And we were very concerned that if we thought it might be very hot, one that was going to be one of the hottest at the time. We've had hotter marathons in the history of the Olympics. And so we were concerned that if we got these athletes really well heat acclimated and it ended up not being hot, would they have a detriment in performance? We were very concerned about that. So if you go through the math, you go through the physiology, you can make an argument that you could improve their performance in cool, or you can make it worse, or you can have no effect at all. So luckily, it ended up being hot, and our athletes did really well. Some of the top American finishes they've had in a long time at that point. And we wanted to follow that up, so we did a study in high level, not elite, but high level cyclists. And so their average VO2 of the men were about 74, 75. The average VO2 max of the women were about 64, 65, I think. So these are very solid, not quite elite, but very, very solid athletes. And what we wanted to do was to separate their intense exercise training from their heat acclimation. So it's like the live high, train low in some ways, in that they're getting, we're making sure their intense exercises, their really important workouts are done in a cool condition, and yet in the examples where it's very, when I want to heat acclimate them, they're going to be their easier workloads. And we had a control group that matched the workload exactly, and they're all in the same teams, and so we split them into different groups. So again, cutting to the interesting bits is kind of the outcome. So let me just orientate you to this graph real quick. So this is the change from shows the change from pre-acclimation. So pre-acclimation to post-acclimation, the difference. This is our experimental group. This is our control group. So automatically you can look and see there's really no change in VO2 max, lactate threshold, max cardiac output, and time trial performance, really in the control group. We have the arrow bars here in the hot, that means a hot condition and cool condition. We did all these tests in hot condition and cool condition. So if you focus on the experimental group, you can see after acclimation, they performed very well in these black bars in all of the hot conditions. No surprise, right? We heat acclimated them, we knew that. But what was amazing is that we saw these really profound improvements in this group of athletes in the cool condition. This is 13 degrees Celsius, so in the low 40s or mid 40s Fahrenheit. So idealized for performance, and we saw dramatic improvements over 2 weeks in this group. This study has been cited a ton, and it's also created a lot of debate, and it's been all very healthy debate. And what I can tell you is that, and I continue to be in these debates, and I continue to work with a lot of teams and athletes implementing these strategies that we've brought up. And not in one study, not in a single study have I seen where if you do heat acclimation appropriately, you make people slower. If you do it inappropriately, then you can mess someone up, overtrain, all that kind of stuff, right? But if you do it right, you're not going to make anybody slower. But in many studies, and more studies, we're seeing that in many different sports, that heat acclimation can be used effectively to improve performance of many of the athletes in various disciplines. So the important thing is that individual responses matter. This is one study that looked at very short-term heat acclimation. It's only less than a week they looked at heat acclimation. I just want to draw your attention again here. This is the line of identity, right? This is pre-acclimation. This is post-acclimation. Again, luckily they use the same colors we did, where they've got the cool and the open bars and the hot and the black bars. So again, you'd expect after acclimation, all those black dots would be shifted to the left as they were, as you can see here. But you notice in the cool condition, they also saw improvements. And this is in this is VO2 max and this is a time trial, total work done in a time trial. And so, again, everything is almost left shifted. But as someone who works with the elite athletes, I want to know, are my athletes on this side, or are they going to be on this side if we heat acclimate them? So we do a lot of heat testing on these elite athletes we work with, and the majority of them do see some benefit in their performance from heat acclimation, even when they're competing in cooler events. So this individual responses really matter. And again, if you look at all the data that's been published so far using heat acclimation as a potential to improve temperate or cool weather conditions, there's always data that look like this, where there's a lot of athletes who are left shifted, okay? Meaning that they've seen some improvements. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them. And so this paper came out not too long ago from Carson Lundby and his group in Norway, and I was excited and very sad to see this paper come out. So what this paper was showing is that after 5 weeks of heat training, again, doing it smart and making sure you're separating the heat training from the very intense active performances, they have seen and shown increase in hemoglobin mass and increase in red blood cell volume. And from this, they found 42-gram increase in hemoglobin in the heat, in the heat condition, and that resulted in 225 milliliters per minute in VO2 max. You don't say, well, it's not very much, but if you're elite, that's significant. But more importantly, really, was they saw an increase in power at 4 millimoles per liter of lactate. And this is not where we compete typically, right? And maybe you're doing a middle distance, but even for most of middle distance, you're in these areas, right? So we usually want to look at the submax performance to see where performance really is having a difference. And so the dirty secret for me is that we knew this. We had shown this 10 years before they had done this. We had seen it. We had never published it because it was our secret sauce for working with athletes. So we've been putting athletes through heat acclimation protocols of this length and seeing increases in red blood cell mass. So a natural doping. It's like going live high, train low, but it's very difficult to live high and train low. This way the athletes can stay with their coaches in their towns, sleep in their own beds, and have some real benefits that you wouldn't see if they had to go to a training camp. There's some benefits to training camp, no doubt, but it's oftentimes out of the realm of possibility financially or otherwise for many athletes. So does it work in an outdoor competitive environment, right? That's a question I've been really working with, and I've been lucky enough to travel around the world and work with many professional teams in many different sports. Of course, I work with our Oregon Ducks, especially the track and field teams, but other athletes as well. I had the privilege of coming here and working with the Olympic Committee, just a fantastic group of people who work at the committee there, do an outstanding job. And I was able to work in, especially with many different athletes, but of course the mountain bikers, which is a passion of mine as well, so it was special. And I did end up riding with some of these people in La Ruta de los Conquistadores, and every single one of them crushed me horribly. But it was my pride to watch them blow past me because they were so fast and healthy and fit. It was wonderful. So hopefully I've convinced you at least to start thinking that there are some benefits to heat adaptation beyond kind of the obvious. Certainly across the age span, I think there's all kinds of work that we can see. We can use it to help improve athletes in elite performance. But most importantly, I think it's for getting people out to exercise, getting them to appreciate exercise. And those who can't exercise, maybe we can use it as an adjunctive to get them started in exercise, get them healthy enough to be able to do that after cancer treatment, after rehabilitation. I don't have time to talk about it, but there's some incredible work now that if you heat muscles up after a surgery or injury, when you have to immobilize, you can actually decrease the rates of protein loss. And so there's a lot of applications for heat. We're just starting to just touch on to the edges of all this work with heat. And so wherever I go, people say, "Oh, I don't want to do your same research. Is it okay if I do heat therapy?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, everybody do heat therapy, please. We don't have enough. We're right now in the 1950s." Where we were in the 1950s with exercise. We've got a long ways to go. We need more people doing it. We need more excitement. We need some ticos putting some athletes or some cancer patients into some heat therapy. So I'm hoping I can motivate people to do that. So with that, I have a million people to thank. That's not even the full list by any means, but I have a lot of people who've helped me with this. No one's successful in a vacuum. Thank you. Preguntas? No?
Chris, is that why the SEC teams do better in football?
That's a very large question. I think that I wouldn't say yes to the heat for sure, because I think they're practicing the heat a lot. Certainly it means when people from Oregon have to go and compete in the SEC, yeah, it's very difficult because the heat is such a problem. I think that's probably more of a better coaching, better access to athletes than we have. It's very hard to convince many athletes to come to a small town in Oregon, but it's not just the heat. No, yeah. But you know, the SEC is not beating the Pac-12 in other sports. It's more than just football, yeah. Can't see the red pointer.
Agradecemos al doctor Minson por su presentación y el doctor Minson estará mañana en el aula 26 en la Escuela de Educación Física y Deportes. En el caso que alguien esté interesado o interesada en saber un poco más de su trabajo, pueden acercarse y conversar con él mañana en EDUFI. Y también, antes de dar por concluida esta primera etapa de conferencias de la mañana, recordarles que tenemos algunos stands con actividades y también algunos productos y equipos en exhibición en el vestíbulo para que por favor tengan el gusto de pasar. Tenemos a Doer Fitness, Global Therapy, Almotec y Dos Pinos. Sin más por el momento, entonces damos por concluida la primera etapa de conferencias y les esperamos de regreso a la 1:30 p.m. para que por favor podamos iniciar puntualmente. Muchísimas gracias y nos vemos.